Mark stepped into the dimly lit restaurant, its ambience a mix of soft jazz and clinking glasses. The air was thick with the scent of seared steak and aged wine, a perfect setting for secrets whispered over candlelight. He scanned the room with a practiced calm, his piercing blue eyes betraying none of the storm inside him. Emma sat at a secluded table near the corner, her auburn hair gleaming under the chandelier. Across from her, Alex lounged, exuding confidence, the tilt of his head and relaxed smile a testament to his belief in their discretion. Mark had planned this moment meticulously, his entry unnoticed as he moved to a shadowed corner. A waiter approached, but Mark waved him off with a silent gesture, his focus entirely on the couple. From his vantage point, he could see Emma's disarming smile, the one that had once been his safe haven, now a weapon used to deceive him. Alex leaned in, his voice low but audible amidst the hum of the restaurant. "I booked the villa for next weekend, just the two of us. Think of it as a getaway before the big reveal." Emma's laugh was soft, coy. "You're incorrigible. Mark would never think to look for us there." The words hit Mark like a sledgehammer, but he remained stone-faced, his emotions locked behind a steel resolve. This was not the time to confront, not without irrefutable proof. Instead, he withdrew his phone, the camera capturing every gesture, every damning word. As the waiter returned to their table with a bottle of wine, Mark noticed the label, a vintage he had introduced Emma to on their anniversary. She smiled as Alex poured, raising her glass in a mockery of loyalty. Mark clenched his jaw but maintained his position. Patience was key. He needed this final act of betrayal to be documented fully. Emma glanced around the room, her eyes scanning the patrons, but her gaze never lingered long enough to detect her husband in the shadows. "We should toast," she said, her voice filled with a giddy confidence. "To us." To us," Alex echoed, their glasses meeting with a soft clink. Mark's heart pounded as he recorded their toast. He had spent weeks piecing together the fragments of her lies, but seeing it unfold before him, in a place they had once called their own, was an ache he hadn't anticipated. Yet, beneath the pain, there was a burgeoning sense of control. He had the evidence now. This was the beginning of their reckoning. Jessica glanced up as the couple leaned closer, sharing whispered promises. Mark slipped out of the restaurant unnoticed. The night air was cool against his face, grounding him as he walked to his car. He sat behind the wheel, the quiet hum of the city a stark contrast to the chaos in his mind. Mark didn't drive home. Instead, he opened his phone, reviewing the video, his hands steady despite the weight of what he had just witnessed. It wasn't anger that consumed him. It was a cold, calculated determination. He had always believed in justice, and tonight he had taken the first step toward ensuring Emma and Alex faced theirs. The next morning, Mark sat in his home office, the sunlight streaming through the window and highlighting the meticulous neatness of his workspace. A stack of papers lay in front of him, bank statements, credit card bills, and call logs, all part of the puzzle he had begun piecing together weeks ago. No, that was only the confirmation he needed. The real confrontation was being orchestrated here, in the quiet of his own home. Mark's fingers tapped on the keyboard, pulling up Emma's digital footprints. Every late-night text, every suspicious transaction, it was all logged with clinical precision. He had set up the spyware weeks earlier, telling himself it was a necessary violation to uncover the truth. The software was now paying off. The timestamps on her messages matched perfectly with her supposed work dinners. Her most recent exchange with Alex lit up her screen. "Emma, last night was perfect. I can't wait for the villa," Alexander said. "You're worth the risk. Mark will never figure it out." "Next." Mark leaned back in his chair, his blue eyes icy and unreadable. "No," he muttered to himself. "He already has." Mark stepped forward and pressed his hand down on the table. He was gone. But not before Marx had thrown a disbelieving glance at Mark, who was considered a very savvy actor. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. His sister Sophie entered, her face lined with worry. Sophie had been his sounding board through this ordeal, a steady voice of reason when emotions threatened to overtake him. His parents had come to England to search for their son. He had been hoping his sister's death would see them successfully search for him, but it hadn't. "Mark," she said softly, setting a coffee mug on his desk. "You were up all night, weren't you?" He nodded, motioning toward the evidence he had compiled. "It's all here, Sophie. Every lie, every betrayal. I have the text messages, photos, receipts. There's no room for denial now." Sophie sat down, her expression a mix of pity and admiration. "What's your next move?" Mark's voice was steady, resolute. "I'm going to confront her, but not yet. I need to make sure that when this comes out, there's no room for her to twist the narrative. She's been clever, Sophie, arrogant, but clever." Finn looked out over his words and saw his model of Camden rise from her. Sophie sipped her coffee, her brow furrowed. "What about Alex?" Mark's jaw tightened. "I've been thinking about that. He's just as much to blame. He knew she was married and he pursued her anyway." "I'll deal with him too," Sophie sighed. "You're stronger than I would be. But Mark, promise me you won't let this consume you. You deserve better than this, and so does your future." Mark nodded, appreciating her concern, but already knowing the path he needed to take. He turned back to his computer, pulling up the video he had recorded the night before. Watching it again, he didn't feel the raw pain he had felt the first time. Instead, there was a grim satisfaction in knowing he held the truth in his hands. Later that day, Mark visited Karen, the hostess who had unwittingly confirmed Emma's deceit. He needed her to corroborate the details, to ensure his evidence would hold up if Emma tried to spin her story. Karen was hesitant at first, but as Mark laid out the details, her expression shifted to one of sympathy. "I'll help," she said quietly. "You deserve to know the truth." As Mark left the restaurant, the weight on his shoulders felt slightly lighter. The pieces were falling into place, and soon Emma and Alex would face the consequences of their actions. He didn't relish the confrontation ahead, but he knew it was necessary. His dignity demanded it, and so did his future. The following evening, Mark sat alone in the Beacon Hill townhouse, the room illuminated only by the glow of his laptop screen. He had spent the day meticulously sorting through the last bits of evidence he needed to solidify his case. Tonight wasn't about observation or data gathering. It was about preparation. The confrontation was near, and he intended to be ready for every possible outcome. Mark's screen displayed a timeline of Emma's deceit. He had carefully aligned her text exchanges, credit card receipts, and travel bookings with the dates she claimed to be working late. Each instance was a crack in the foundation of their marriage, now laid bare in the sterile lines of a spreadsheet. As an engineer, Mark found cold comfort in the precision of it all. Numbers didn't lie. An alert pinged on his phone. It was from the spyware he had installed on Emma's devices. Her latest message to Alex made his stomach tighten. "Emma, I think Mark might be suspicious. He's been quieter lately." Alex relaxed. "He's too practical to make a scene. He'll accept it eventually." Mark clenched his jaw, his hands gripping the edge of the desk. Accept it? The audacity of their plan still astounded him. They had underestimated him at every turn, assuming his loyalty would outweigh his sense of justice. They were wrong. Determined to maintain his composure, Mark opened a folder on his desktop labeled Legal. Inside were scanned copies of prenuptial agreements, financial disclosures, and divorce filing templates he had quietly prepared. His next step would be to contact Rachel, a mutual friend who had already shown signs of siding with him when everything came to light. If Emma tried to control the narrative, Rachel's voice could counter it. A sudden knock at the front door startled him. Mark stood, his heart pounding with a mix of anger and anticipation. He opened the door to find Sophie standing there, her coat pulled tightly around her. "I had to come," she said, stepping inside. "I couldn't stop thinking about everything you're going through." Mark gave her a small, weary smile. "I appreciate it, Sophie. Honestly, I could use the company." "Ah," he answered, with a kind look. They sat together in the living room, the silence between them heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Sophie broke the quiet. "Have you thought about what you're going to say? When you confront her, Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. I've rehearsed it 100 times in my head, but it's not about the words. It's about the evidence. She'll try to deny it, twist it, maybe even blame me, but I'm ready for that. Sophie nodded, her expression grim. Good, because she's going to try to manipulate you. Don't let her guilt you into second-guessing yourself. I won't, Mark said firmly. She's already made her choice. Now it's my turn. As the night deepened, Mark felt a strange calm settle over him. The betrayal was devastating, but for the first time, he felt the power shifting. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was the architect of his own justice. The day of reckoning arrived with the sharp bite of a cold morning. Mark stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie with steady hands. His face was calm, his eyes focused. Inside, however, his thoughts churned. Today he would confront Emma and Alex, armed not only with evidence, but with the strength that came from knowing he was in the right. At precisely noon he walked into the high-end restaurant where he had first confirmed their betrayal. This time it wasn't to lurk in the shadows. He had called Emma earlier, suggesting they meet for lunch, a rare gesture he knew she wouldn't question. The stage was set, and Mark arrived early, choosing a table where he could see the entire room. Excellent France. Chamberlain frowned. I don't approve of Peter Landeston. He's so easy to scowl. Emma arrived a few minutes later, her auburn hair perfectly styled, her disarming smile firmly in place. Mark noted the careful touch of makeup, the way she moved as though she was still the woman he once adored. But he saw through it now. Every gesture felt rehearsed, every smile a mask. Mark, she said brightly, leaning in to kiss his cheek. This is a nice surprise. Lunch in the middle of the day? What's the occasion? Mark motioned for her to sit, his expression neutral. We need to talk. I thought this would be a good place. Emma's smile faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. She recovered quickly, though, settling into her seat and ordering a glass of wine. Is something wrong? Mark reached into his briefcase and set a small folder on the table. You tell me. Her eyes flicked to the folder, her confidence wavering. What is this? It's everything, Mark replied, his voice steady. The text messages, the receipts, the photographs, proof of your relationship with Alex. For a moment, Emma froze, her eyes wide. Then, as if by reflex, she laughed nervously. Mark, are you serious? Alex? That's ridiculous. Mark opened the folder, sliding a printed text exchange toward her. It was one of the more damning messages, one where Alex had referred to their affair as the best risk I've ever taken. Emma's face drained of color as she read it, her hands trembling. Explain this, then, Mark said, leaning back in his chair. Or should I explain it to everyone here? Emma's eyes darted around the room, the weight of the public setting bearing down on her. Mark, please, not here. Mark's voice was calm but unyielding. No more lies, Emma. No more pretending. I want the truth, and I want it now. Emma's voice cracked as she began to stammer out excuses, each one weaker than the last. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. It was just, I was lonely, Mark. You were always so busy. Mark's calm demeanor didn't waver. You mean I was busy building the life we dreamed of? The one you've been using to fund your secret relationship? Emma's response was cut short when Alex entered the restaurant. His confident stride faltered the moment he saw Mark sitting across from Emma. Mark turned to look at him, his piercing blue eyes locking on to the man who had betrayed him. The game was over. It was time to dismantle their illusions piece by piece. The room seemed to shrink as Alex stood frozen in the doorway. For a man known for his charm and confidence, his expression betrayed a sudden loss of control. Mark leaned back in his chair, exuding a calm that only made the tension more unbearable. He gestured toward the empty seat at their table. Alex, Mark said evenly, why don't you join us? We were just discussing the future. Emma looked down, her hands clasped tightly, while Alex hesitated before walking over. He sat down, his movements stiff and deliberate. The air between them felt like the calm before a storm. "Mark, Alex began, but Mark raised a hand, cutting him off. "Don't," Mark said, his voice low but commanding. "Don't insult me with excuses. You've already said enough." He slid another document across the table, this one a copy of a hotel receipt with Alex's name on it. Emma flinched. She fell back in her chair. "I want to understand something," Mark continued, his tone sharper now. "You both knew what you were doing. You planned it, lied about it, and carried it out right under my nose. Did either of you think about what this would do to me? To us?" Neither of them answered. Emma's lips trembled as if searching for the right words, while Alex stared at the table, his arrogance visibly crumbling. Marx let the silence stretch, allowing the weight of their betrayal to settle over them. "You used my trust as a shield," Mark said, his voice tinged with restrained fury. "And for what? A few stolen moments, a fantasy that you thought would never catch up to you." Emma finally spoke, her voice shaky. "Mark, I didn't mean for it to happen this way. I never wanted to hurt you." Mark's laugh was cold and bitter. "That's rich. You didn't mean for it to happen. Emma, you planned weekend getaways and lied about work trips. You've been meaning for this to happen for months, if not years." Alex cleared his throat, attempting to regain some composure. "Mark, this doesn't have to get messy. We're all adults here. Maybe we can—" Mark's hand slammed onto the table, silencing Alex instantly. "Don't. You don't get to dictate how this ends. You've already taken enough." Emma began to cry, but Mark didn't soften. "I've already filed for divorce," he said, his voice calm but final. "The evidence is airtight. You'll get a fair settlement, Emma, but nothing more. As for you, Alex," he turned to the man, his gaze icy, "I forwarded everything to your employer. I doubt they'll look kindly on someone who uses work connections to sleep with client spouses." Alex's face turned ashen. "Mark, please." "You made your choice," Mark said firmly. "Now you'll face the consequences." Mark rose, his movements slow and deliberate, as if to emphasize the gravity of the moment. "Enjoy your lunch," he said, his voice steady. Then, without a backward glance, he walked out of the restaurant, leaving Emma and Alex to face the whispers and stares of the other diners. Outside, the crisp air felt like freedom. Mark inhaled deeply, letting the weight of the confrontation lift from his shoulders. It wasn't joy he felt, but a quiet, steady resolve. He had reclaimed his dignity, his future, and, most importantly, his peace. As he walked away, Mark allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The life he had built with Emma was over, but a new chapter was beginning. One without betrayal, without lies, and without them.